Hello and welcome. I'm Ananya Datta for Hindustan Times, and our focus in this video is the Middle East. A ceasefire was finalized between Israel and Hamas after 15 months of war. The aim is to bring a permanent end to the fighting, but there is no clarity on that as of now. Palestinians have started returning to their broken houses while Israelis are reuniting with the released hostages. The positive days have come after months of chaos and destruction. But are they here to stay? I'm being joined by Colonel Miri for some perspective. She's a fellow at the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism and has served in the intelligence community in the Israeli military. Over her 20-year career, she served in diverse positions in the field, combat units and research departments. After retiring from the military in the year 2004, Colonel Eisen became the foreign media advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. She was the first woman in Israel's history to serve in the position and started the job when the Second Lebanon War broke out. Colonel, thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
Pleasure.
Let me start with a question each one of us are struggling with. Do you think the ceasefire is going to hold?
There's no question that it's fragile. Why is it fragile? Because Hamas view the hostages as a bargaining chip. So I can agree with President Trump that when it looks at the Hamas side, it's not just fragile. There's a possibility that even this first stage of releasing 33 people will not go through.
Do you get the sense that the ceasefire means two different things for the two sides?
The ceasefire is to get the hostages back to Israel. For the Hamas, the ceasefire is about getting their jailed prisoners, terrorists out of jail. So we have very different aims. For Israel, the ceasefire will hold as long as Hamas does not continue any kind of fighting. For us, it's to get back the additional 94 Israelis and others that have been held for 480 days.
Colonel, were there any differences between the military and the government over the terms of the ceasefire?
Not over the terms of the ceasefire. I think there were questions on the implementation, where the military says, we're the professionals, this is how we implement that. And the government, and because of politics, is going to step in and say, no, we want you to implement it differently. There I definitely see the differences in opinion that have to do with the way that the IDF was fighting in the Gaza Strip, the length of that, the willingness to, at the end of the day, agree to, which is a very difficult ceasefire.
You know, the reason I ask you this is because Israel's military chief has resigned. He says he recognizes his responsibility for its failure on 7th of October 2023. Do you expect Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to do the same?
I do not. And I'm going to say as an Israeli, sadly, I do not. Not in the sense that I think that he has to resign, but he has to be held accountable. And the way that you're held accountable in a democracy is both by the vote, so I don't expect him to be voted in again. I would have hoped that he would also stand up and resign. The chief of staff took responsibility from the beginning. He already stood up in November of 2023, at the beginning of the war when we were still at such harsh stages, and said, I hold full responsibility and I'm staying in the position to make sure that it isn't in a time of war that I won't leave. The Prime Minister has not even once said that he holds himself accountable or even that he holds the government accountable. That one I disagree with strongly. I absolutely hold them together with the military accountable. I do not expect the Prime Minister to resign.
Not that you need any reminding, it's been 15 months of fighting. Do you think the IDF has achieved even half of its goals?
I think that we all need to step back for a moment and understand the difference between the visuals. Just think for a moment of the visuals of the hostage release of this last week that we all viewed. Everybody said, look, here's Hamas in uniform, they still exist. When you do a zoom out from that picture, it's hundreds of people, not millions of people. And the aspect of what Hamas as a terror army does is that when they are in the Gaza Strip and they are fighting, terrorizing in that sense, they wear civilian clothes. They don't wear uniforms. But in the photo op, when they are giving out the hostages, when they want to terrorize us psychologically, suddenly the uniform comes back on. So I absolutely think that the IDF has very much degraded, you don't destroy completely ever, but degraded the terror army capability. And I don't think that we ever could destroy, let alone degrade, that side of the psychological terror. That is exactly the difference.
Colonel, I really appreciate the fact that you're able to tell us the reality of this war and wars in general, that any militant group is never completely wiped out. But that makes me wonder, when will Israel fully withdraw from Gaza? Because there are people like Itamar Ben-Gvir who say Israel will not leave unless Hamas ceases to exist. So my question is, when will Israel leave?
So I hear the voices who call for the destruction of the Gaza Strip. I do not support them. I think that they are erroneous. I think that they are saying something you cannot achieve. I think that the people who are saying it are willing to take steps that I think are very harsh, and I hope that we never get there. So I want to hope that in that political juggling, that the main aim, which was return the hostages and defeat Hamas, that those terms are ones that we can live with, that we're bringing back all of the hostages, and that defeating Hamas does not mean destroying the Gaza Strip. There's a huge difference between destroying Hamas's terror capabilities and between destroying an area that has 2.3 million people. It's a tough area as is, horrific destruction that we've already done there, that the people did not bring it on themselves, but Hamas did.
Where does that leave Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his political future then?
The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, we call him in Israel in Hebrew the magician. I consider him to be a political magician because he knows how to juggle and to make his government survive. And he has done this time and time again, meaning he managed to survive that party, Ben-Gvir's party, resigning from the government by bringing in additional supporters from other parties. That's part of the way that he survives. What will happen now? That is exactly the question of where we are now. We right now are at what I'm going to call a crossroad. If we want to get back our now 94 hostages, which include both alive people and dead people, we know that up front. If I say it as an if, we want to get them back, you have to have a ceasefire.
Iran-backed Houthis are touting themselves as the new leader of the axis of resistance. Is that another war coming Israel's way?
The Houthis kind of are like what I'm going to call the rowdy child. I don't think that they're funny, and I think we should take them seriously. But the Houthis themselves do way more than what the Islamic regime of Iran tells them. The Houthis have completely challenged the sea route from Asia to Europe via the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal is the end of it going into the Mediterranean Sea in Egypt, but they control the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And they literally stopped one of the main shipping routes from Asia to Europe. And they're not being held accountable. And that's the Houthis. That's not the Islamic regime of Iran.
With the way geopolitics is progressing in the Middle East, do you think a direct confrontation with Iran is a possibility?
You mean direct confrontation again, because there was a direct confrontation both in April of 2024 and October of 2024. Iran directly attacked Israel twice using all of the different types of projectiles. All that has happened right now is that we have heavily degraded the terror military capabilities. But what about the ideology? What about the Islamic regime openly calling for the annihilation of the state of Israel, and Hezbollah saying the same, and Hamas saying the same, and the Houthis saying the same, and nobody calls them out on that. It's like, that's just ideology. Look at what the ideology did. Look at what it did, not just on October 7th. I'm very wary of where I'm going with this right now, but the Islamic regime of Iran has tried to boost up its relationships with Russia, with China, with North Korea, all relationships that they had before. They now want to boost them up, and they want to boost them up because they feel that they are under attack.
Do you think Donald Trump's administration will be different from Joe Biden's when it comes to their Israel policy?
Time will tell. It will be different. That I promise you. I think that they will be an involved administration, but so is the President Biden administration. I think that President Trump, wants to advance the Abraham Accords that he brought to the table in 2020, which is such an important component going forward of relations between Israel and the Middle Eastern environment that is not directly connected to conflict. It's not about not noting the Palestinian conflict, but it's about broadening the type of dialogue that exists in the Middle East, where you can have a dialogue that isn't about the conflict. That's an important component. And I think that they'll be very involved.
Colonel, let me come to the human side of this war. Close to 47,000 people are dead in Gaza. Almost the entirety of the Strip's population has been displaced. You obviously know this much better than me. Israel has one of the world's most powerful militaries. So tell me, is Israel seriously telling the entire world that there is no way to wipe out Hamas without killing innocent Palestinians?
Nanya, this is the question that I have asked myself every single day from October 7th, October 8th. But what Hamas built inside the Gaza Strip, there's no equivalent. And I say very sadly, I do not know of another way. I do not know of any military anywhere that knows how to fight it, meaning the other way would be don't fight at all. To not fight at all would mean that Hamas's attack component, what they did on October 7th, is being shown as a conceivable modus operandi, meaning it's something that you can attack, you can butcher, do atrocities, take hundreds of hostages, hold them, barter with them, use your own people as your defense system, and that works. You're going to get what you want. And we have to live with the fact that we targeted terrorists and we killed civilians. When you said the 45,000, you know that includes what the chief of staff said is 20,000 terrorists. That doesn't make me feel better. That means it's 25,000 who are not terrorists. And I understand the implications and the depth of what that means. And I don't know of a different way to fight against that type of terrorism. I do not know, and I can't wait for us to find it. I want us to find the sci-fi weapons that recognize that somebody is a terrorist and I'm only going to be hurting them and everybody else is innocent, and it doesn't exist except for in the movies.
You know, there is this saying often said in respect to wars, if you're killing innocent people, you're indirectly recruiting for extremist groups. Is Israel that naive to think that the destruction it has caused in Gaza for the last 15 months or further cause in the future will have no consequences? Because maybe not Hamas, but a new group could erupt.
The de-escalating, or the term that people like to call right now of de-radicalizing, that's for the day after. We're not there yet. They have held the hostages for such a long time that as if the hostages have become a non-issue. That's not the way you view it in Israel. They took those people and they're still holding them. And now we're being told you have to get the hostages back, and you, Israel, are responsible for de-radicalizing the other side. I'm challenged by it. I say that up front. I have a heart, and I would like to see people who have a heart, who are not calling for my destruction. And the tone of the aspect is that, and now Israel, you're the ones who need to make sure that they de-radicalize. Can I request that perhaps the mothers there would not want to support their children doing horrific acts?
Colonel, what does a post-war Gaza look like to you?
A post-war Gaza, first of all, sadly, for the 2.3 million people on the Gaza Strip, is a destroyed place. Post-war, it needs to be rebuilt. When I say needs to be rebuilt, it needs to be rebuilt before, not just after. Entirely. We, Israel, in our targeting of Hamas, in the way that they built it, we have destroyed buildings. We've destroyed the infrastructure, because that's where Hamas put all of its capabilities. You have to rebuild the electricity, the water system, the sewage system. But that's the infrastructure, that's the physical side. Part of it is in relation to the de-radicalizing. I think that they hate us, and I understand that. I think that we are going to be held for them the worst thing ever in the way that we destroyed because of where Hamas was, and the education of the next generation, which we're not going to be involved in. That's going to be up to the people within the Gaza Strip, to whatever the international community comes in to help rebuild. to look at it and see, not in holding themselves accountable. The victim is not the one who has to be held accountable, but in understanding that if you don't look forward instead of just accusing the past, then you're going to constantly stay within the same loop of violence. I say that about my own Israelis, that we need to look at ourselves. We've gone through horrible times. It's made us more extreme. We need to tone it down.
And will Israel help in that rebuilding you're talking about?
I think that Israel cannot be part of the rebuilding, but we are the ones who enable the rebuilding. Israel and the Gaza Strip will still border each other, as the Gaza Strip borders Egypt. We are the ones who can enable it, but we're not the ones who can do it.
All right, Colonel Miri, thank you so much for your perspective. It has been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for giving us the analysis right from Israel.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated this interview. It was very in-depth, very interesting. I hope that we all have better times in our near future.